Welcome to Connections. I'm Jodi Hildebrandt. So glad you're with us. Connections is the solution. You can change.
I could be dishonest, and I think I'm getting away with it because nobody knows. It might be 5 years, 10 years. I might even take it to the grave with me. My dirty little secret.
Welcome to the Empowering Joy class. I'm Jodi Hildebrandt. I am sure you're here because you have a desire to heal, a desire to have joy in your life and connection in your relationships.
Okay, I need help.
Who influenced Ruby Franke's evil parenting techniques? Hello, and welcome back to this episode of True Crime Producer. I'm your host, Chantal. So on our last video about Ruby Franke, we had a couple of requests asking for us to do a deep dive on her business partner, Jodi Hildebrandt. So that's what we're going to do today. So Jodi Hildebrandt was born in 1969 in Utah, United States. She is known as a counselor, as an author, as the founder of her company called Connections, also a social media influencer. Now, however, she is most infamously known for her involvement with Ruby Franke and is also part of a major case now in court. So Jodi completed her Bachelor of Arts from the University of Utah in English and later got her Master's in Science from Brigham Young University. So from what I've seen online, it looks like Jodi was divorced in 1999. There's also speculation that she has no relationship with her ex-husband or her children. If that's accurate, it's very confusing how she could be any sort of leading voice on how to maintain relationships, marriage, or otherwise. I'm very interested to know what her ex-husband thinks about all of this, but he has not come out and said anything, nor have her children. So controversy with Jodi started pretty early. Back in 2012, her license to practice as a counselor was suspended for a number of reasons, some of which include sharing sensitive and private information about her clients with members of the clergy in her church, also sharing sensitive information about clients with other mental health therapists. Now, as I'm sure you know, that is absolutely not allowed. You are not allowed to discuss personal, private information about clients that are coming to you as a counselor with anybody else, let alone members of your clergy, members of your church. She apparently also shared clients' information about their medical diagnosis with members of the local university, which that client has come out and said was absolutely detrimental for them. So Jodi formed the Connections classroom in 2010. Connections is now a very infamous business, which eventually went on to include Ruby Franke as a business partner, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So we did a deep dive on the Connection website, just checking it out, seeing what exactly it was that she offered. Let me read you some of their taglines from it. Empower your life with the training that is built on principles of honesty, responsibility, and humility.
So this life is governed by principles, physiological principles, emotional principles, spiritual principles. It's your charge to learn about principles and not run away from principles, shooting off your shoulder like bam, bam, as you go running off into destructiveness.
I know that I am not the only mom who has spent much of her time looking for a program or a class or some kind of curriculum that I could share with my child, where my child would easily understand and learn about their value and their potential and to inspire them. What I have found is Empowering Joy, and it is now a family favorite. The tradition is every Saturday we get up and we listen to Empowering Joy as we make breakfast together. It really sets the stage for the rest of the weekend. The changes that have occurred in my home have been calming. Because of Empowering Joy, my entire family now has a common vocabulary of words that we use with each other, that we know exactly what the other person means when they say them. We can communicate. but I guarantee you, you will find principles of joy in this class. At the end of each week, as I prepare for a new Saturday class, I'll take the slides off of the fridge and put them in a book. This provides my family with a book of principles and easy to understand visuals. This is literally the book on raising children that you have been looking for. And it is a great way to learn as a family, from mom and dad, the children, invite grandparents, your aunts and uncles to join, and then you have curriculum to discuss the rest of the week. I like to print out my slides and put them on the fridge, and then anytime the kids come home from school or come home from a play date or have an interaction that they're uncomfortable with, or maybe they're being disrespectful, I can go back to the visual and plug any experience into what we learned in the Saturday class. And the reason you can do that is because these are principles, and principles apply across the board in any situation.
I just found that to be deeply ironic, claiming that her fundamental principles include honesty and responsibility. She was never honest with any of her members about exactly what she was doing, how she was abusing Ruby Franke's children, how she was abusing members of her own family, which again, we'll touch on that later. But being honest and being responsible are two qualities that could not be further from who Jodi Hildebrandt was as a person. The prices for these sessions range from $21 a month, which doesn't include a one-on-one with Jodi, and goes up to $181 per session for one-on-one sessions with Jodi. The thing that I found really interesting about this site is how clearly she seems to prey on folks that are vulnerable. For example, she claims that if you are feeling any feelings of worthlessness or inadequacy, conflict in relationships, intimacy problems, communication breakdowns, and frankly, any block that prevents having and creating peace or joy, she says she's able to help with them. Now, these are incredibly broad statements to say anybody that's feeling worthless or inadequate, everybody in their life has felt those feelings to some degree at some point in their life, especially any block that prevents having or creating peace and joy. I mean, it's so broad. So it seems to me early on from just a quick glance at her site that Jodi was very skilled at preying on those that are vulnerable, that might be feeling down in that particular point in their life for whatever reason, suffering from mental health issues. She would target those individuals and then use them to manipulate into joining her cult, for lack of a better word. Those types of statements are incredibly bold, and if anybody says something like that to you, whether it's an individual person like Jodi or her company called Connections, it's something to be wary of, because obviously those types of issues ranging from anxiety and depression to, relationship issues, these are incredibly complicated problems that people deal with in their day-to-day life. And claiming that Connections or any company or person has all the solutions for such complicated issues, it's more likely than not going to be false. To have one person just come in and be able to fix everything, it sounds like a scam. It reads like a scam to me. And actually, one former client of hers recently went on KUTV too.
So years ago, I was made aware of Jodi and her program and her therapy sessions, which I began in person here in St. George. I felt like her style was a little bit more maybe aggressive than what I had experienced in the past, which I thought was going to be a really good thing. I then joined her women's group, our weekly group sessions. And so I did that for nearly a year.
What were those sessions like, the group sessions?
Those group sessions were myself and however many other ladies, I would say 10 to 12 regularly. Same women, and had a expectation of joining every week, not missing any weeks, 2 hour long sessions, probably similar to other group therapies where you are, checking in. You are asking for time if you need time, with the group specifically. And within the group, other rules were that you had to make a minimum of 7 calls a week, and you had to be available for a minimum a week. So you were on the phone a lot, with these other group members, not so much Jodi herself. If you wanted to speak to Jodi or get help from her, you had to do one-on-one private sessions and then pay additional for those. I would say with traditional therapy or other therapists I've gone to, there's a little bit more of a feeling of understanding of maybe what a person's been through, whereas this was pretty strict on like no excuses. You're just going to make it happen and it's up to you 100%. I would call it more military style if I had to give it a name versus something else.
We got married in April of 2021, and the first couple months didn't go very smoothly. And that's when we went to go see Jodi. I would say my estimation would be October. I could pull it up on my phone. I have a text from her, but
Where did you go see her?
it was not in-person sessions. So Jodi, I think one of the biggest ways that she makes her money is by having a lot of people be able to do really quick Zoom sessions. And so we did it on Zoom or something of the like, through her connections company. So it was all online. I never saw her in person, thank goodness.
Do you blame her for your marriage ending?
No, I don't. However, I will not absolve her of guilt for making the marriage go a little less smoothly. Jodi wasn't able to take our marriage and destroy it. She wasn't the reason we were initially in marriage counseling anyway. But the methods that she uses are very, very easy. Like if you can get people to do what she wanted us to do, divide and conquer. She wanted to separate us in our sessions, separate us in our groups. Yes, she very easily could have been one of the reasons our marriage ended had we not seen through it. My wife saw through it a little less quickly than I did. And because she said that Jodi kind of gave her like this feeling of hope. And so that's what Jodi did for my wife, is she gave her this false sense of hope that she could be helped by Jodi, and that Jodi had all the answers, and that was something that really bothered me, because the reason I kept going to see Jodi longer than I would have is because my ex-wife, she was given that hope by Jodi. And from what I've seen with like the situation with Kevin and the situation with other men that have come forward, them being divided from their families and Jodi stepping in between the marriage as opposed to guiding the marriage so that they can be together, she is very, very manipulative. And what she was doing would never be cohesive. Like it was never to put us closer together. It was to further us apart. So do I blame Jodi for ending my marriage? Thank goodness, no. But I blame her for everything she did to try. And I know she would have tried a little bit harder because I was not on board with her distortion, all of her craziness. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was her, was when I had overheard, because everything was digital, everything was on Zoom. My ex-wife was on these sessions, and my mom and myself, we could kind of overhear the sessions, just because, we're all in the same house. And it sounded to me more like a cyberbully group to bully the individuals in the group than it was a therapeutic conversation about supporting each other and making marriages work. All these women were very bitter. They were very angry at their husbands. Jodi was the ringleader of a bunch of very hateful conversation. And so I knew it upsets me because I know that she has affected a lot of marriages and they've come to an end because of her. I can guarantee that much.
Jodi was really good at using shaming tactics to pit husband and wives against each other. Particularly, she was able to make husbands feel really bad for, any lust or romantic feelings they might be feeling towards somebody else. Of course, that is a very difficult thing to go through in a relationship. But she taught these husbands that because of those thoughts, those impure thoughts, that they were a danger to their own families. This particular client recalled how another member of the session was a successful business owner, this man who felt really guilty over doing like double takes. Like he would see a beautiful woman walk by and he'd kind of like look at her twice and just to see her again, and felt such shame because of those actions that he went on to get his own apartment and distance himself from his family because he felt like he was such a danger to them. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a complicated issue. You might not want to do a double take in front of your wife or your partner, but to be taught that you are a danger to your family, it's exactly what we are seeing with Ruby, where the punishments do not match the crime. Yeah, it might be immature, or you might not want to do it. And again, every couple has their own preferences for how something like that might be handled. But to say, because you did this thing or because you thought such impure thoughts, you can no longer see your children. We no longer want you at the house. You have to go get your own apartment. It's just so extreme. The man also went on to talk about how some of these other people in the group had been separated from their families for so long that they started to become suicidal. So they hadn't seen their children or their wives in such a length of time and had become convinced that they were evil and that they were not good people. They were not good fathers or husbands. And because of that, had suicidal ideations, which is incredibly sad, especially, again, if the issues are around such minuscule things. And hearing this story recounted by this former client reminded me of Ruby Franke's husband and how he had moved out of the house over a year ago. His name was Kevin Franke. And Kevin moving out of the house is a really interesting part of the Ruby Franke story, because we know from videos and, what's come out in court that Ruby has always had a tendency to be quite abusive with her children, but it seems that the abuse really went to another level once Jodi moved in. Jodi only moved in once Kevin moved out. So it begs the question, was Jodi kind of a mastermind in some way? Was she encouraging this separation between Ruby and Kevin so that way she could swoop in? And the question then becomes, why? Why the hell would this Jodi woman want to move into a new house with Ruby Franke and begin such horrific manipulation and abuse towards her children? And now I've seen a couple of rumors online suggesting that perhaps there were romantic motivations behind such a move. Maybe Jodi had her sights set on Ruby. That's absolutely a possibility. Or maybe it was something more simple, like Jodi saw a business opportunity, because as we know, Ruby Franke was incredibly popular on social media with her YouTube page, 8 Passengers. And Jodi might have seen this as a chance to be her big break. And if she just really got under the skin of Ruby and convinced her of all these, arguably very insane things, that Jodi would be locked in. This in absolutely zero way excuses Ruby Franke's behavior. If in fact she was manipulated in any way by Jodi, that does not excuse what she did. There's absolutely no world where a good, insane, and stable mother would carry out such horrific torture to her own children because her new friend told her that her children were possessed, or told her that her children deserved such punishments. So Ruby is not off the hook in any way because of Jodi, but it does just go to show how involved Jodi was in Ruby Franke's life. However, as of a few weeks ago, Ruby has turned on Jodi. Ruby says that Jodi took advantage of her and her desire for self-improvement and twisted it into something heinous. So again, just to break that down, Ruby is saying that Jodi saw an innocent person looking to simply improve herself, maybe make better connections with her children and family, and through a mastermind manipulation situation, she was able to convince Ruby to torture her own children. That's ridiculous. I think we can all agree that that should absolutely not hold up in court. But again, shows that Jodi was very involved and absolutely got under the skin of Ruby. So how did Jodi and Ruby even meet? According to my research and what I found online, Ruby was looking for a mental health therapist and just general life advice, and came across Jodi. It makes sense that they would have run into each other eventually. They're both kind of in the parenting world in Utah. So it makes sense that Ruby initially reached out to Jodi. However, I think then Jodi saw an opportunity and kind of zeroed in on Ruby because of her large social media following. That's my take on it anyway. It really could have been a number of other reasons that Jodi decided to hop on this. But again, it's worth just pointing out multiple times that while Jodi may have seen an opportunity, Ruby is the one that still allowed Jodi in, not only to her house, but allowed her to influence her parenting decisions, which we already know were shady and downright bad in many cases, but allowed her to influence just how she acted around her own kids, including being physically and mentally abusive. So the approach of Ruby's lawyers now is to essentially blame everything on Jodi. Her lawyers claim, and I quote, that she systematically isolated Ruby Franke from her extended family, older children, and her husband, Kevin Franke. So again, obviously that excuse only goes so far. Was Ruby influenced? Possibly. Honestly, probably, likely. But does that mean she should be forgiven for all the horrific things that she did to her own children? Absolutely not. This is also not Jodi's first tussle with abuse, and in particular, child abuse. So Jodi's niece, Jessie, has come out and spoken about some of the horrible things that she endured while she was living with Jodi.
It's hard to quantify and everything that happened, because it was not just physical abuse, but it was emotional and severe spiritual abuse as well. There was being duct taped and starved and being emotionally isolated and tortured, being forced to sleep outside in the snow, telling my family that it was because she was afraid that I was going to murder her in her sleep, telling me that Satan was working through me, and all the while I believed what she was telling me.
Oh, it makes me so angry is thinking about in 2012, when I was planning on taking her to court and no one believed me and no one took me seriously. And in fact, I was completely, not only invalid, but just like discouraged and shamed into even like thinking about doing that. All the people that would have not been harmed, these children that would not have been abused, the people that saw me duct taped, the people that saw me being abused in the church that did absolutely nothing. I'm certain my mom was just like at her wit's end. She didn't know what to do. And Jodi was just like, don't worry, I have this. Also, the church recommends me. I know what I'm doing. But Jodi also was convinced that I was a drug addict. She was convinced I was a sex addict. She was convinced that I had abortion. She would rationalize and validate these types of behaviors through dreams and visions. She would have these dreams that God came to her and told her that I had had an abortion. And also she was convinced that every word that came out of my mouth was a lie, and that
gave her rationale to put duct tape on my mouth. And that's why I was always duct taped. And like, I wasn't allowed to speak to my parents. I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone alone. And then like with the duct taping, I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone. So if I was at church and I wasn't duct taped and a church leader came in, because this happened, a church leader would come and be like, "Are you okay?" And I would have to just stare at them. Because she also had spies. She had people reporting back to her anything and everything that I did. So if I did talk to someone, she found out somehow. Like, the amount of paranoia and fear that I had, where it's like, I can't talk to anyone. And also people saw me duct taped. People saw that these things were going on. And other than like the few people that like went to Bishop and being like, "Hey, something's wrong," no one did anything.
And this is from several years ago. So Jodi has been using similar tactics for years. And it just begs the question again, how many children have been affected by this? I doubt that it's just her niece and Ruby Franke's children. I'm very curious about Jodi's own kids. But from everything that I've read, they have not come out and said anything about their mother. But I'll definitely be keeping a lookout on that to see if they do come out and say anything. I think it's very likely that if she was able to abuse her niece and her friend's children, that it's very likely her own children were abused too. The abuse that Jodi Hildebrandt, Jodi's niece, was put through is also shockingly similar to the abuse that Ruby Franke's kids were put through. As a matter of fact, when Ruby Franke's 12-year-old son escaped from the window and ran to a neighbor, he was actually escaping from Jodi Hildebrandt's house. It was at this neighbor's house that he explained that Hildebrand had put ropes on his limbs and used honey and cayenne pepper to dress his cuts and wounds. The good news is Hildebrand has since pleaded guilty to 4 counts of child abuse.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to District Court. We are here this morning in the matter of State of Utah versus Jodi Hildebrandt, case 231501763. Mr. Clark and Mr. Shum are here representing the state of Utah, and Mr. Terry is here with Ms. Hildebrandt. We are scheduled for a waiver of preliminary hearing. Mr. Terry, it appears you have just handed the court a signed plea agreement.
That is correct, Your Honor. With respect to the waiver, Ms. Hildebrandt, we have had discussions. She fully understands the purpose of a preliminary hearing, what the burden of proof would be, and that she has the right to a preliminary hearing, but in conjunction with the entry of her plea today, we waive the preliminary hearing.
And in fact, there is a provision in the written plea agreement that operates as a waiver of the preliminary hearing. All right. Ms. Hildebrandt, I've been handed a written document, a plea agreement with your signature on it. Did you sign that document?
Yes.
And you did that to represent to the court that you have read the document carefully, that you understand what you've read, that you agree to all of the terms that are set forth in that written document?
Yes, sir.
You've had sufficient time to ask Mr. Terry any questions that you have about the agreement or its potential effect?
Yes.
Is anyone pressuring you to enter into this agreement, or is anyone promising you anything that I haven't been told about or that is not in the written document?
No.
Are you under the influence of alcohol or drugs today?
No.
Is there anything today that could interfere in any way with your ability to understand the agreement, its potential consequences?
No.
No physical condition, mental health, or emotional condition, nothing that could interfere with your present ability to evaluate the agreement and decide if it's what you're prepared to do today?
No.
You don't need more time, you're ready to go?
Yes.
Any further record, counsel?
Your Honor, the agreement contains a factual basis. There are a few details in the factual basis that we are not in full agreement with. However, this is a guilty plea. It is not an Alford plea. The factual basis sets forth facts that we agree with, that Ms. Hildebrandt agrees with, that are sufficient for the court to accept her plea with respect to the 4 counts. to which she is pleading guilty, and so we ask the court to accept her plea agreement.
And apart from what is in the written factual base in the plea agreement, you have, I'm assuming, reviewed voluminous discovery. You don't dispute whether there is an actual or an adequate factual basis.
We do not.
All right, then. Anything else before the court receives Ms. Hildebrandt's pleas?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing for the state, Your Honor.
Then, Ms. Hildebrandt, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
And to count 6, also aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
The court finds that there is a sufficient factual basis. The court, in addition, finds that Ms. Hildebrandt's pleas are made knowingly and voluntarily. The court, therefore, accepts and enters those pleas, dismisses the remaining 2 counts. We are anticipating a PSI, although part of the plea agreement appears to be that Ms. Hildebrandt will not contest a prison sentence.
Correct.
Is that right?
That is correct. But we are asking for a PSI.
All right. Then the court orders the preparation of a pre-sentence investigation report and set sentencing at 10:30 a.m. on February 20th.
In Hildebrandt's plea agreement, she admitted to knowingly inflicting and allowing another adult to inflict serious physical injuries upon 2 children living at her home. Some other shocking details from Hildebrandt's plea agreement include forcing Ruby Franke's 9-year-old daughter to jump into a cactus multiple times. Again, this was Ruby's 9-year-old daughter to jump into a cactus, which is a punishment I've never even heard of, forcing somebody to hurt themselves. She also forced the girl to run barefoot on the dirt ground for an extended period of time and kept her isolated from others. She also admitted to helping Franke torture her youngest son. Some of these things include kicking her son with closed boots on and holding his head underwater. So both Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke have confessed to telling 2 of the children that they are evil and that they are possessed, and that all these horrific and painful things that are being done to them are only being done to them out of love, which, as you can imagine, must cause a significant amount of psychological damage to a young child's mind. I think knowing that you are supposed to love your mom and your caretaker and trust the adults around you, and yet they are telling you that you are bad and that you were evil and that you deserve to be hurt, must be an incredibly confusing and complicated thing, especially for the mind of a young child. And I can only hope that they're seeing the best of the best psychologists and psychiatrists and will continue to do so for, unfortunately, probably the rest of their lives. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of True Crime Producer. If there are any videos that you are wanting to see from us, please leave us a comment below and we'll check it out. Thank you so much. Bye.